Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. It is Thanksgiving week here in the United States, so I am actually taking a bit of a breather from recording the week-by-week episodes of this show. I am currently with family as you are listening to this, traveling out of state, so I was thinking about putting together something different for this week, but instead what I'm going to do is actually something I've been meaning to do for quite a while. So back when Game Informer was shut down, I started another podcast on my Patreon page. It was called All Things Gamers, and if you're listening to the All Things Nintendo podcast, that is primarily focused on Nintendo. All Things Gamers was just everything else, right? Like I did a weekly show. I think it hit every single Wednesday. And it was just a bonus episode for the $10 patrons of the podcast at that time. And I just talked about topics outside of Nintendo, but still within the gaming space. And when Game Informer started, it started appearing as though it was coming back. I wanted to kind of send that show off with a bang because there was just no way I could see myself being able to do two shows every single week while still having a full-time job covering games. So the way I wanted to send it off was I split it out over the course of 3 weeks as it was winding down, and I ran down my top 50 video games of all time. And I kind of pieced it together as a kind of like the way that I ended the last 3 episodes of All Things Gamers. Now, that show has not been around for many, many months. I think it was February was when I published the final episode of All Things Gamers on the Patreon page. But I've never made any of that stuff public. And some of it would apply to All Things Nintendo. Other stuff would not apply to All Things Nintendo. But this one, I think, is one that is particularly applicable. And it is just me running down my top 50 games of all time. And you know, if you're watching the video version, you will see that I am in my old house. So it's completely different office space. But I think it's a fun listen. If you're interested at all in like my taste in video games, which I'm assuming there's at least a passing interest in that if you're listening to my podcast. I understand if you're there primarily for the news and reviews of my guests and everything, that's also a completely valid reason to listen. But I, took a large chunk of my afternoon one day back in either December or January or whatever, and I recorded just a rundown of my 50 greatest games of all time, or 50 favorite games of all time, more specifically. So what I'm going to do is, rather than, doing kind of a historical deep dive, rather than doing like the other stuff that I do when I need like an evergreen episode that I'm pre-recording, I am just going to throw to that video that I recorded earlier this year. So apologies if there's anything outdated. I think maybe in the Ghost of Tsushima entry, I maybe allude to the fact that I'm excited for Ghost of Yotei. That shouldn't be a surprise if you've listened to this podcast. I think I've talked about how that's one of my favorite games of all time. So apologies for anything that's a little bit outdated. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I talk about how I'm excited for Nintendo Switch 2. We'll have to see, but just apologies if there's anything that is outdated, but it was recorded earlier this year, and hopefully you enjoy it. It's something a little bit different for this podcast feed, but yeah, we're going to throw to that right now, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to count down my top 50 games of all time. These are not the greatest games of all time. I'm not attempting to do an objective list of the greatest video games of all time. Instead, these are just the 50 games that I have enjoyed the most in my life. They are the 50 games that I mean, at least in this ordering, I was able to put together and feel reasonably confident that it's correct and accurate and reflective of my actual feelings. And on top of that, I want to give a disclaimer that it's entirely likely, if not probable, that I have missed or forgotten or overlooked a game or 2 or 3 or even 5. Maybe even by the time this game or this video comes out, I will be thinking that I have forgotten something and will be in dire need of retracting. But for now, These are my top 50 games that I have ever played in my life. Starting off at number 50, it's Shenmue. So this might be a bit of a surprise, but I still remember when this game came out on Dreamcast in 2000 in the US. It was just a revolution for me. I was reading all the reviews, and it was getting just incredible 10 out of 10s, and I was like, what is this weird looking game? This it's it was marketed as kind of like this vengeance driven story, which is accurate, but at the same time it was like I fired it up and I had no idea what it was. Like, I was walking around this small Japanese town in the late 80s and trying to avenge my father, but first I had to like go and play darts, or hang out at the arcade, or talk to a bunch of people and figure out where sailors hung out. And I first I was very much opposed to it, and everybody else that I ever tried to show this game to was very much opposed to it. But then once they got a little bit of time with it, again, this is in the year 2000, and kind of the life simulation angle really started to take hold. That's when I think it just clicked for me, and it clicked for everybody else, and it started distracting from whatever friend gathering was happening. People originally, they went from thinking this is a stupid looking game, nobody would ever want to play this, to being like, hey, can I come over and play this game more? And that just told me everything about like the direction that the games industry was about to head, and it turned out to be true. I think that the Shenmue series is highly influential on the Yakuza series, and even though the Shenmue games have not aged particularly well, and Shenmue 3 was a disappointment because it didn't progress the mechanics and the conventions of the series far enough into the modern realm, that first Shenmue game on Dreamcast was just an absolute revelation to me as a gamer who was, late middle school, and really starting to discover new ways that video games can deliver these fun experiences. Coming in at number 49 is NBA Street Volume 2. This was a game that came out in 2003. I played the GameCube version, and it was just it was the appropriate evolution of one of my other favorite sports video games of all time, NBA Jam. Which, if you've seen my videos, you know that I have an NBA Jam arcade cabinet in my basement where I record my podcast. And NBA Street Volume 2 really just delivered everything I wanted from like a natural evolution. I know that like NBA Hang Time existed, but like NBA Street Volume 2 was the perfect arcade style basketball game, and I think to this day remains the most perfect arcade style basketball game to ever exist. It had a fun career mode. It had accurate, or embellished representations of all the NBA stars of the era, and then plus like several classic players as well. And yeah, I just became completely obsessed with this game, and I wish that they would just put out a modernized version of this exact game, but with modern rosters, because I would eat that up. It would be, I feel like a lot of times arcade sports developers in 2025 feel too uh they overthink it. They think that we need all these different modes. They think we need all these different features, and it needs to be something that appeals in ways that the old arcade style games didn't. But I would argue that arcade sports games are appealing on their own. You don't need all the bells and whistles that something like an NBA 2K5 or 2K25 or a Madden NFL 25 has. You can just put out an incredibly playing game with some replayability factors. Like I said, NBA Street Volume 2's career mode was phenomenal. But yeah, I wish that they would bring back the NBA Street series and not overthink it the way that they did in the later entries of that franchise. Coming in at number 48 is a game that just came out last year, and it's there's a few of those on this list actually. I think last year was a surprisingly strong year for gaming, and it is Astrobot. This was a game that I think it deserves mentioning alongside the greatest 3D platformers of all time. The level of creativity on display in Astrobot is nearly unrivaled. The little Easter eggs, I know that they're not for everybody, but I thoroughly enjoyed seeing some of my favorite uh, characters from PlayStation and third party game history what represented within the levels of Astrobot. And I think that the developers at Team Asobi realized that people exactly the ways in which people are going to engage with these levels, and they created levels that rewarded people for the exploration. Like even areas that were broken, it felt like I was breaking the game by going up onto this archway that you weren't supposed to get up there, obviously, based on how the ways that I had to get up there. Like I almost had to like clip up a hill to get up to the top of this archway. But when I got up there were minor rewards waiting for me. So the developers realized this was something that people were going to do, and they designed the rewards and the level structure as such. On top of that, the levels are incredibly replayable. They're just beyond cleverly designed. The gimmicks are second to none. I loved every single gimmick pretty much. And they even surprised me, which is something that not a lot of platformers are able to do in this era. So Astrobot earns its spot on this list for all of those reasons and more. Number 47 is another action arcade style sports game. And, back in the early 2000s and the late 90s, we were in kind of the pinnacle of the snowboarding and skateboarding games. And this is SSX Tricky. This game was a successor to the PlayStation 2 game that I was absolutely in love with, just called SSX. It was a snowboarding game. And SSX Tricky took everything to the next level. And to this day, the the feeling of pulling off these combos in midair and just falling just unbelievable heights all the way to the ground and landing it after doing like 12 backflips and all kinds of different like completely unrealistic tricks that you can pull off in this game, and landing those tricks and then hearing Run DMC's It's Tricky blast like 7 times over the course of a single run in this game. That song is still burned in my head for that reason. But this game is just unadulterated fun, and something that if I still had access to it on a modern console, I could fire this up and have an absolute ball no matter when I'd play it. Number 46, I think this might be somewhat controversial, or maybe it would have been controversial when the game came out, but in hindsight, I think a lot of people view this as the best entry in the series, but I think it's the one that I've had the most fun with, and is 2013's Grand Theft Auto 5. Now, I'm not somebody who ever got into GTA Online, so I'm not even going to consider that in here, but I think that the multiple protagonists within the story was just a great idea. I was concerned about that coming in. The story itself is just a fun romp through the city. The city itself is incredibly designed. I think this is Rockstar really firing on all cylinders within the GTA franchise, and it's one of the most successful video games of all time, and for good reason. I know that a lot of that is for GTA Online and all of the platforms that it's come to. But Grand Theft Auto 5, I still remember I made this calculation on my way to work. I was working outside of the games media space at that point, at least from a full-time capacity. I was still doing games media on the side. But GTA 5, I made the calculation that morning that I was going to be late to work because I was going to go pick up GTA 5 and then come into work and then go home and play it after I got off work. And that's exactly what I did, not taking into account the fact that I would have to install some data. So it ended up, didn't even really matter that I went and picked it up early, because I was going to have to end up installing all kinds of stuff to make the game work anyway. That said, once I was in it, I was completely absorbed by GTA 5, one of my favorite open world games of all time, and well deserving of being on this list. Number 45, this is a game that is a successor, and I've already referenced the franchise, so I might as well just name it. It's Yakuza Zero. This came to the US in 2017, and it was, I've always wanted to try the Yakuza series at that point, and I just never got around to it. I remember seeing it in all these magazines that I read, Yakuza, Yakuza 2, even Dead Souls seemed like a really cool game, even though I know that now that that's not exactly the most well-liked Yakuza game. But Yakuza 0, my entry point into the franchise, and it was such an incredible entryway. It got me so hooked on these characters. The character of Kazuma Kiryu and Goro Majima obviously has a huge role in Yakuza 0, and I love Majima's characterization in Yakuza 0. His showman like tendencies, his running his cabaret club is so much fun. I love seeing these characters come together at the end, and they are both so much fun to play. And I think that Yakuza 0 almost ruined Majima's characterization in the actual early Yakuza games, because Yakuza 0 is a prequel to the first entry in the series. So I actually prefer the characterization of Majima in Zero, but I understand like why they had to tell that origin story, and I loved it. I love the feeling of hanging out in Kamurocho in this series, and Yakuza 0 really set me down a path of playing all of these games, and I'm so happy that it did. And once Yakuza 0 came out, it really pushed forward the rest of the Yakuza games. We've just been on a nonstop ride of remasters, new entries, even some remakes at the Kiwami games ever since this game came out, and I'm so happy that it exists. Number 44, we're going to go with Need for Speed Underground. This game came out at the height of the Fast and the Furious, at least the street racing Fast and Furious games, and it hit every itch. It scratched every itch that I wanted when it came out. It was street racing through and through. It had an amazing soundtrack. The customization was fantastic. I loved like just collecting cars and customizing them in ways that you couldn't in other games. And some of the songs in that soundtrack are still just some of my favorite songs from any licensed soundtrack ever. And I liked Underground 2, even though I think Underground 1 is the better game. And I wish that we could get a game that captured the spirit of Underground and its sequel in this series. I know that there have been other strong Need for Speed games. The most recent one, the name is escaping me right now, but it is. I reviewed it for Game Informer, and it was something that it was the closest that the franchise has felt to the Underground games since those games came out. Need for Speed Unbound is the name that I was searching for. So yeah, just a truly fantastic game, Need for Speed Underground, and Need for Speed Unbound is I guess a spiritual successor to that style of Need for Speed game. Number 43. It's another game from last year. If you've listened to the All Things Nintendo podcast, you've heard me talk about this game so much. It is Balatro. Very well could be my favorite indie game of all time. Just perfectly designed, a perfect evolution of the poker mechanics that the mechanics that were established in poker and then brought forward into the gamification of the roguelike genre, and giving you just everything that you need to create an experience that has you hooked from the very first game that you play. There's still things. I'm probably 25 or 30 hours into this game if you count across my Switch and iOS versions, and there are still things that I'm discovering about this game, still strategies that I'm trying to figure out, and they keep adding new content, and it is just one of those games that it feels like it might be a forever type game for me, where I can, we might be in 2035 and I am still going back and playing Balatro because it's still that much fun. We'll see how it all shakes out, but for now, I think that Balatro at 43 feels appropriate. Number 42 is a game that has a very special place in my heart. And this is one of those entries where it isn't it wouldn't deserve a place on the greatest games of all time, but because of its importance to me, I want to give it a space here, and that is Super Mario Kart. I've told the story so many times about how I would play this with my dad when he was home from his work trips, which were quite frequent when I was younger. And Super Mario Kart just it was the perfect game for that quick sit down, get right into the action. We could make up our own rules as we're playing. Like we could make teams up if we wanted to. We could ally with each other. We could compete with each other. I still have a memory of my dad waking me up in the middle of the night on a school night to tell me that he beat Rainbow Road on 150cc. And the Rainbow Road in this game was just brutal. And it introduced not only the kart racing genre into the mainstream, and there have been so many games that have copied this ever since, but it also gave us battle mode, which is one of the most incredibly fun modes that you can play in multiplayer. To this day, Super Mario Kart holds a very special place in my heart, even if I acknowledge it's far from the best Mario Kart game. Number 41, another game that I love a lot, but will acknowledge it has some flaws. The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. This came to GameCube in 2003. I was immediately turned off as a high school kid who wanted to be cool. I wanted that realistic Zelda game. I wanted the one that they showed in the GameCube tech demo, and with the Ocarina of Time style character designs and world design. But no, we got this cartoony Zelda, and I bounced right off it. Even though I bought a copy when it first came out, I bounced right off of it and was like, this isn't for me. I don't like the cartoony aspect of it. The story was a little slow to start. Then it came to Wii U, the HD version, and I said, you know what? Zelda is my favorite franchise. It's been thoroughly drilled into my head at this point. It was undeniable that the Zelda franchise was my favorite in the games industry. So I owed it to myself to try it again. And when I tried it again on the Wii U, it finally clicked for me. And I loved every minute of it, aside from the Triforce Quest. That part I did not love. But everything else, the battle system, the story, I loved. The revamped sailing mechanics were so good at this point, like not having to wait for the wind. You can actually just further adjust the wind to your liking, which was huge. They did a great job of remastering. It showed the timelessness of this art style. The fact that I was complaining about it back in 2003, and then this version came out, and the HD version, it really just showed how well it had aged. Because when you compare it to other games from that era, it just looks substantially more novel. And Wind Waker has remained very high up on my 3D Zelda ranking, and I would be surprised if too many games. I mean, obviously there are going to be some more Zelda games, spoiler alert, on my top 50, but I would be surprised if too many Zelda games in the future can overtake the Wind Waker. Rounding out the 40s here, at number 40, Pokemon Go. Now, I was a lapsed Pokemon fan up until Pokemon X and Y. I have adored the franchise in the late 90s and into the early parts of the 2000s. But then I fell off for about 10 or 15 years, and X and Y got me back in. And then, once Pokemon Go came out, I was just completely full steam ahead with Pokemon. I was back watching the anime. I was taking day trips just for Pokemon Go. I was getting groups together to go play Pokemon Go at the good spots around the city. And, I would make complete days out of it, where I would be like, all right, let's go to play Pokemon Go at this one spot that's really good. Then, we'll go and hang out at this other spot that is just another place that's pretty good for Pokemon, but also it's a fun spot to get some food and drinks. But Pokemon Go completely rewired my brain about what a video game could be. And I've yet to find something that hits as hard as Pokemon Go did at its peak. I haven't played for several years now, but Pokemon Go at its height, when the developers Niantic finally figured out how to scale that game to the completely absurd number of players that it had right at launch. Like once it figured out the server issues and it started delivering content on a regular basis, that game was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had in the history of video games. Going into the 30s now, at number 39, I think most people would agree this is one of the greatest RPGs of all time. If not, it's certainly one of the greatest RPGs in the modern era, and that is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. This came out in 2015, and I was not a big Witcher fan prior to this game. I tried Witcher 2, just kind of didn't like it very much. I only made it a few hours deep. I know that doesn't really say that I gave it a fair shot, but The Witcher 3, I just the world is so inviting, which is hilarious because it's actually a completely uninviting world because it's so hostile everywhere you go. But that said, like it invites you to go on this adventure. It invites you to explore in ways that so many games try to but fail. And the side missions, the side content are so instrumental in that. And being able to go do a side mission and then have it kind of weave back into the main story, and everything feels so meaningful and so just a part of the adventure. It doesn't feel like, okay, well, I'm going to go do this, and it just feels like you're putting the entire story on hold. It somehow feels as though you are still taking part in the main story. And that is just an incredible accomplishment by CD Projekt Red. And not to mention the cast is incredible. Geralt, Ciri, Yennefer, Triss, all of those characters. Some of the most incredible side content that's ever existed in a game. And I just, I can't recommend playing The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt enough. And I'm very excited for The Witcher 4 whenever that ends up coming out. Number 38. It's a game that actually fittingly takes inspiration from The Witcher 3. It's with particularly from its approach to side content, and that is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, I know that a lot of people have their problems with Rebirth. It was my game of the year in 2024, but it has just one of the most explorable open worlds, and I know that like it does the checklist style of content. It makes it so that sometimes you will put the story on hold for a very long time just to make sure that you're completing each region. And some of the regions aren't the most explorable, but when it all comes together, the highs of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth are almost unlike anything I've ever seen. The feeling of going through the giant openness of this retelling of the events of the one of the most beloved RPGs of all time, it, it was such a jump forward in terms of like ambition from Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I love Remake as well. But Rebirth really just took everything to the next level. Now, the storytelling, you could definitely pick some things out in the storytelling that aren't really up to what we accomplished with Remake. But in terms of actually playing the game and exploring it and making your way through the story, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is one of my favorite entries in the franchise, and I'm so excited to see what this talented team that is comprised of people like Yoshinori Kitase, Tetsuya Nomura, Motomo Toriyama, Teruki Endo, and of course Naoki Hamaguchi. I am so excited to see what they come up with next, because I really think that if they learn the right lessons from Rebirth, the third entry in this trilogy could be something truly special. Going to 37, it's another arcade-style racing game, 2004's Burnout 3 Takedown. You could really choose any of this era of Burnout. My Burnout Revenge was also a very good entry, but Burnout 3 Takedown really feels like the pinnacle of the Burnout franchise for me. I never really got into Burnout Paradise. I think that this franchise is at its peak when it's getting you into the action immediately. It has the linear style of driving. You're thrown onto a racetrack and you have a race, and then you can wreck your opponents, throw them into the walls. It is built around the fact that you are going to be openly hostile towards your opponents. The crashes are spectacular. The crash mode is incredible. And I can't tell you how much time I poured into Burnout 3 Takedown and Burnout Revenge by extension. It's one of the most fun arcade racers I've ever played, and it's one that I wish that we could get some remasters. I know they keep remastering Burnout Paradise. I would love a collection of those early era Burnout games because I think that they would still hold up to this day. You knew that this was coming. A Sonic entry. Number 36, it's Sonic Mania. Came out in 2017. And, I was very much in a down spot for the Sonic franchise at this point. Um, I was working on a feature called Where Sonic Went Wrong for Game Informer, and it was all about kind of the rise and fall of the Sonic franchise. And then this got announced alongside Sonic Forces, which Sonic Forces ended up not being a very good game, but Sonic Mania ended up being fantastic, and the teaser of Sonic Forces looked incredible. If you go back and watch that original teaser, it really looked fantastic. But getting my hands on Sonic Mania for the first time at, I believe it was the 25th anniversary celebration. Yeah, it would have been the 25th anniversary celebration at San Diego Comic-Con 2016. That was when they announced Sonic Mania, and I was there for it. And playing it, it really restored my faith in this franchise that I was feeling quite down on at the time. And you know, Sonic Mania, it really followed through on that, and it gave you it gave you a lot of extremely well designed levels and an unbelievable soundtrack. So Christian Whitehead and his team understood the assignment. They made a game that plays like the classic Sonic games that we all grew up with and all loved and wanted more of. And it also gave you some new elements to it, right? Like there were surprises and exciting reveals throughout that entire game, even though it did sometimes feel like a greatest hits collection of like, got to make sure this character shows up, got to make sure this level, like Chemical Plant Zone's got to be in it. I would have loved to have had more original levels, but even the remixes that they did on the classic levels were absolutely incredible. And, I would love to see this team tackle something else. I know that what we got instead was Sonic Superstars, which was developed by other developers instead of the Christian Whitehead led team, and they went on to develop Penny's Big Breakaway. But if they could come back together and make like a Sonic Mania 2, I would be beside myself with excitement. We're going to go back 20 years prior to that for number 35, GoldenEye 007. The Rare was on such an absolute tear and in this era. They had their hits and the late parts of the SNES and then into the N64. Just what a run between, Banjo-Kazooie and Perfect Dark, but GoldenEye is maybe my favorite game of theirs from that era. And the reason for that is that, the multiplayer revolutionized console first person shooting, and the game itself revolutionized console first person shooting. You have this deep story mode that, yeah, like by today's standards it's not very good, but the experience of going through that story mode and loose retelling of the GoldenEye movie, which I hadn't seen. I had only played GoldenEye 007 and fell in love with the story, and then I watched the movie and I remember being actually kind of disappointed by the movie itself. But GoldenEye 007 showed that first person shooters are not just for the PC crowd. And yes, I understand that back in 1997 all the people who were playing shooters for so many years prior to that on their PCs kind of scoffed at GoldenEye 007. But for us console players, being able to play a game like this on with a controller just felt so revolutionary. And I have so many late nights that I remember staying up so late playing GoldenEye with my friends at sleepovers or just parties, and just getting together and playing the multiplayer, outlawing Odd Job, and doing Moonrakers only, or Golden Guns or Slappers only, just any kind of fun variation. All the cheat codes and the unlock methods you had to go through to do that, like completing levels in a certain amount of times, doing no casualties, all these different missions that you had to complete alongside the just getting through the level made that such a fun experience. And it really set the tone for my taste in gaming for probably the next decade after that game came out. And speaking of games that really dictated who I was as a person, number 34 was Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec. This was a title on the PS2. It came out in 2001, and it launched me into a full-on car obsession for probably the next half decade. After Gran Turismo 3 came out, I was not really into cars in a super meaningful way, right? Like, I thought cars were cool, but like Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec, I think, had maybe the best career mode of any sim racer ever, and had an incredible garage full of great cars from the era and previous eras, and the mechanics and the driving physics were so fantastic. And as you know, like, if you've ever played a launch window racing game on a new console, you know what those things are doing. You know what those games are all about. They're all about showcasing the power that a new console is able to deliver. We see that every time a new Forza game comes out on Xbox. We see it every time a new Gran Turismo game comes out on PlayStation. It is showing the leap forward in technology that we had. And think back to the leap ahead that we got from the PS1 to the PS2. Seeing Gran Turismo 3 and like the leaps forward it made from what the PlayStation 1 was capable of, it blew my mind, and it really stuck with me for years to come. And I feel like anytime I play a sim racer, I'm chasing the high that I once felt with Gran Turismo 3. Now for something completely different. At number 33, Super Mario Brothers 3. I know there's often a big debate over which platformer is the greatest platformer of all time. If you've listened to my podcast, you know my answer for that. But one of the games that's always in the conversation is Super Mario Brothers 3. This came out in 1990 in the US, right at the tail end of the NES's life cycle. And, even though it's not my pick for the greatest platformer of all time, it is platforming perfection, as close as you're ever going to get it at platforming perfection. The levels fantastically designed. The music is terrific. The final world is maybe among the most challenging mainline levels in a Mario game. Obviously, there are like bonus levels at the end of other Mario games that probably exceed the final levels in Mario 3, but it all builds up to telling a really great story of, King Koopa had defeated all the different members of the royal families of the different kingdoms, turned them into animals, and then given it to the Koopalings so they could rule in their place. And you have to go back and take them down kingdom by kingdom, restore the kings back to their original forms, and then take down King Koopa in a very fun, unique battle. And this really established Mario even further, because this was, after Mario 1 and Mario 2 and then the Game Boy games. Mario was obviously the king of platforming at this point, but Mario 3 was a phenomenon. I remember seeing The Wizard and having them basically serve an entire feature film as a glorified trailer for Mario 3. That's how big of a phenomenon Mario 3 was, and rightfully so. It's one of the greatest games to ever be made. And, if not for another game, it might be my pick for the greatest platforming game of all time. And we're actually going to stay on the early 90s Nintendo era for the next entry. Number 32. This came to the arcades in 1991, but 1992 is when the version that I played the most came out. And that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4 Turtles in Time. It came to the SNES in 1992, and for my money, this is the greatest side-scrolling beat 'em up game that has ever existed. Taking control of the turtles as you go through all the different eras of that this game presents. I love that it thinks that, like, it posits a scenario where, like, the 2020s basically look like, we're all on hoverboards and everybody's, futuristic cities that are floating in the skies. And now here we are, I think 5 years after that level, and very much not that. But Turtles in Time is just as I said with Gran Turismo 3. Turtles in Time is kind of that high that I'm always chasing with any side-scrolling beat 'em up. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge is the closest that I've ever come to that. The Simpsons arcade game that also is from Konami was terrific as well, as was the X-Men arcade game. But Turtles in Time for me is always going to be the blueprint of any great um, side-scrolling beat 'em up. And the boss battles, being able to fight the Turtles Rogue Gallery and take down Shredder in just an absolutely climactic battle, and being able to play with friends. I wish the SNES version had 4-player co-op instead of just the 2-player, but I get it. There were only 2 controller ports. The Cowabunga collection, I don't know how much rebalancing that would have required to add the 4-player co-op to the SNES version, but that would have made that clearly the superior version. But the arcade version also had 4-player, which makes that as an argument. But for me, it's the SNES version at number 32. Number 31, we're moving ahead a few years, but still staying on Nintendo. It is the launch title for the Nintendo 64. Super Mario 64 absolutely broke my brain when it first came out. Seeing this guy that I've spent so much time with, Mario, pop out of that pipe in the very first moments of the game. And even before that, when his face pops up on the screen, you can manipulate it however you want. That was a moment that I will never forget. Just the feeling of, like, oh wow, that Mario's in 3D now, and then being able to just run around. And they did such an incredible job, not only making it so Mario feels fun just to control using the N64 controller. I mean, after all, it's been like revealed that the N64 controller was literally designed with Mario 64 specifically in mind. But then having them dump you in the courtyard of Princess Peach's castle made it so that you immediately wanted to jump and do all kinds of fun maneuvers as Mario. They knew exactly what players were going to do as soon as they got control of Mario. They didn't start with some huge bombastic cutscene like they do now, because they knew they had to tutorialize what it meant to play a 3D platformer. And they did it to such perfection. Playing Mario 64 today still feels good, even though the camera, yes, has plenty of frustrations. The level design is not nearly what future games would deliver. But Mario 64 is just pure fun and was so impactful to me back in the mid to late 90s. And talk about games that set a course for my overall tastes in video games, and Mario 64 is near the top there. Heading down several years into the future, number 30 is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Now, I know this might be a somewhat controversial pick. The Assassin's Creed franchise remains one of my favorite franchises that I've ever played. Assassin's Creed 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood were peak Assassin's Creed. Syndicate, I think, gets a raw deal because of the rough launch state and reception of Unity before it. Those 3 games are the best of the classic style of Assassin's Creed. I was actually not a fan of Origins when it first came out, but then when Odyssey arrived, and I fell in love with Cassandra as a protagonist. I truly think that she is one of, if not the best protagonists. I mean, Ezio is always going to be hard to top, but Cassandra is incredible as a protagonist in the Assassin's Creed franchise. And it was the right amount of content for me. The world was so much fun to explore. I loved, sailing through ancient Greece, and I pretty much 100%ed that game. I hit as many of the achievements as I possibly could, including revealing the entire map through exploration, which was a pain because there was just like one little pixel on the map that I hadn't been to. And I think that it was the right level of bloat. I think that Valhalla maybe bloated a little bit too much, And now, ever since then, Ubisoft has been kind of dialing back what the Assassin's Creed franchise delivers. But Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a game that I poured more hours into than any other entry in the franchise. And I'm a person who, when I was considering getting some gaming related tattoos, the Assassin's Creed logo was, up there with the tattoo designs I was looking at. I mean, this was back when Brotherhood was, one of my favorite games of all time. So it was a different era and a different state for the Assassin's Creed franchise. But, Odyssey was the one that really hooked me more than any other game in the franchise. At number 29, 2008 was a pivotal year in my life. I was in college. I was, getting closer to graduating, and I was writing about music at the time, and I'd been a lifelong gamer. And I went to Circuit City in my college town because they were going out of business, and I wanted to see what the deals were. And they had the somewhat recently released Fallout 3. And I bought the collector's edition because it was on liquidation, and I had heard that this game was incredible from like somewhat recent reviews. And I fired that up, and that was the game that made me inspired enough to write my first video game review I had ever written. And it I loved exploring the Capital Wasteland. As somebody who grew up in Maryland, I enjoyed the little references to things in the region in which I grew up in, and it's just such an establishment of that formula. And it was such like a seminal work for me in terms of, this is what an open world game could be, and this is what side quests could be. And as I've talked about in other entries in my top 50, there are other games that have surpassed that. You could say Grand Theft Auto 5, The Witcher 3, those have all surpassed it. Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, all have surpassed this in terms of like the open world design and the side content, and some of them give you just incredible consequences of choice. But Fallout 3 really established a lot of my love for all of those conventions. And to this day, I think it's my favorite Fallout game, even though I have a lot of love for 4, New Vegas. I'm excited for an eventual 5. You got to think that's coming sometime soon, given the success of the Amazon Prime show. But Fallout 3, I think, might be my favorite entry for many years to come. And like I said, it's the game that I liked so much that I decided to take a break from writing about music and try my hand at writing a video game review. And yeah, it's just a very important game to me. Number 28 is an interesting one because I've already talked about one entry in the franchise as being very important to me. I would say Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is easily the best Mario Kart game. It came out in 2014 on Wii U. I would not say it had that title when it came to Wii U. But 3 years later, in 2017, when it came to Switch, it easily took that title away. The 2014 version, just called Mario Kart 8, it had some of the best racing that has ever existed in the franchise. But the battle mode was just terrible. They basically just repurposed racetracks from the Mario Kart 8 stable of courses and made it so that it was in that was your battle mode, as you could go forward or backward and hit people there. We needed intentionally designed battle mode courses, and that's what Mario Kart 8 Deluxe really delivered, on top of all the DLC that we got for the Wii U version at launch, new characters at launch, new courses. We got the booster course pass. Oh my gosh, the doubling the number of tracks available. It really turned Mario Kart 8 Deluxe into the ultimate version of a Mario Kart game. Um, I know that Super Smash Brothers Ultimate has the "Everyone is here," the moniker and the slogan. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has just as much claim to that as Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and I could still fire up Mario Kart 8 Deluxe today. Really, whether I'm playing by myself, playing online, or at a party, or with friends that don't really game, this is a game that you can always fire up and have a great time. And it's just the breadth of content that exists on Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is commendable and makes it tough to consider how Nintendo could really progress past this, but they're going to. They can't pass up another terrific, fantastically selling title. So Mario Kart 8 Deluxe easily gets a spot on this list. Number 27, a game that I think is one of the greatest games of all time, one of the most perfectly designed games of all time, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. It came to the SNES in the US in 1992, and The Legend of Zelda on NES was one of my first games I ever played. It was just this incredible eye-opening moment of, oh my gosh, like this is a thing that a video game can do. Like, it just dumps you into a world. You go out and you explore and you complete missions and solve dungeons, fight bosses, find the path forward in the next game. And yeah, Link to the Past, I remember renting that, thinking like, okay, well, there's a new Zelda game and I have a Super Nintendo, so why not check this out? I just so happened to get so lucky at the rental store when I was in second grade, and they had A Link to the Past there. And I was like, well, I've got to check this out. And I did. And I played so much of that game that weekend when I had it as a rental. And it just like completely captivated me. The music, the story was terrific, and it really felt like the true evolution of what they were attempting to do, but were limited by the technology of the time with the original Legend of Zelda. A Link to the Past, bringing it back to that style, to that format that was established in the original Legend of Zelda after Zelda 2 was kind of a deviation from that, was the smartest thing that Nintendo could have done. And the dungeons are among the greatest dungeons in any video game ever. The story is terrific. The twist that the Dark World is where you go after you beat what seems like a final boss pretty early on, relatively to um, the story. You get to the Dark World, and it's like, oh, I'm just beginning this game, and it is just at the time the greatest game of all time, and to this day probably a top 5 game of all time in terms of like just objective quality. Just an immensely important game in the video game landscape as well. Going on to number 26, this was a reboot of a series that I always admired from afar but never really played a ton of until this entry, and that is God of War 2018. I owned God of War 1 and 2 on PS2, and I just never really got into it. I liked the combat, but like it just didn't feel as deep as I wanted my action game to be. Fast forward to 2018, and the soft reboot of God of War delivered everything that I wanted from this franchise. The combat feels so good. The story is emotional. It's a beautiful story of a father and a son, a father who has a regretful past and has a lot of remorse in his heart, has suffered incredible loss, trying to teach his son and struggling to learn how to be a father. It's just an emotional adventure to go on. Atreus is an incredible character, and I love the interplay between these two characters. The combat, the encounters are so well designed and well paced. The boss battles, the cinematography, the cinematic moments, like the what everybody's affectionately called the superhero battle in the early parts of the game, are it's one of the most incredible moments in my entire time playing video games, is that fight. And I love God of War Ragnarok, and it also has some incredible moments, but I think God of War 2018 was just more impactful for me. All right, so now we are officially in the top 25, and we're going right back to the racing genre. Forza Horizon 5 is my favorite racing video game of all time. I love Forza Horizon 3 and its outback setting. I love Forza Horizon 4 and its British countryside setting. Forza Horizon 5's recreation of large parts of Mexico is just it's awe-inspiring. The different biomes that they present you with, the different feelings that you have as you drive, whether it's through like a jungle area of Mexico, whether it's through a city, whether it's through a desert. Just the lush environments, the barren environments, all of it. The beach areas are incredible. Resort, city, Puebla, all of these different areas feel so unique and so created with love. And that, on top of this the fantastic style of racing that Forza Horizon delivers, incredible cinematic moments as you go through this game, and not to mention like maybe the greatest opening of any game that I've played in a long time. Of the intro of dropping all these cars from planes with different music, different biomes. It really shows you what this game is all about. And the way I've described it, and it was my game of the year in 2021, but the way I've always described it is it thoroughly gets out of your way of having the most amount of fun possible in that moment. And I adore it for it. My favorite racing game of all time. Coming in at number 24 is Street Fighter 6. And I know that in the time since launch, there's been ebbs and flows of what people think about the merits of how good Street Fighter 6 is. But for my money, Street Fighter 6 is the best modern entry in the franchise. Now, I'll fully admit I am far from a competitive player. Um, but there are so many cool mechanics that work in with each other to create just an unbelievable experience. And I'm somebody who grew up with Street Fighter 2, and I have a Street Fighter 2 cabinet in my basement, and it's one of those games that brought me back to the feeling that I had playing Street Fighter 2 back when I was a kid. And the roster is terrific. The visual design is fantastic. The music is great. The mechanics just feel so good, and it there's this huge story that I'm just never going to finish because it's just so robust, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's so many different things to do in that story. It almost feels like a Yakuza game tacked on top of a completely mechanically sound Street Fighter game. And it earns a spot in my top 25 games of all time, coming in at number 24. Number 23, it's a game that I did a deep dive into the history of on an episode of All Things Gamers somewhat recently. It just turned 20 years old last year. Halo 2. And this is a game that had, another special place in my heart. This time because it was the game that drove me to buy an original Xbox. It was the game that I played the most my freshman year of college because we set up kind of LAN parties because it was like high speed internet was kind of brand new on my college campus, and the only thing that you could do was interact with other people in your dorm. So we would get into these intense battles with other people on the floor, and we would set up 4v4 matches or whatever teams we wanted to set up, and we would just have these intense matches. We'd also do 2v2 tournaments where we would set up like a bracket style, and those would get so so sweaty palmed and so much fun. It revolutionized online gaming in a lot of ways, giving us the Xbox Live Arcade, or not Xbox Live Arcade, Xbox Live, ushering that era in for Xbox. A lot of people don't remember that Halo 1 on Xbox did not have online multiplayer. That was only the PC version. Halo 2 gave us matchmaking. It gave us so many great things about the first-person shooter genre as a whole. Like Halo Combat Evolved was instrumental to showing that console shooters can be just as good as PC shooters. I think GoldenEye walked so that Halo 1 could run, and Halo 2 just took everything to the next level. Yes, I'm less than excited about the way the story ends in Halo 2, but it paid off in Halo 3. But the multiplayer aspect of Halo 2 is just impossible to overstate how much fun and how important that was at the time. Going down to 22, Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. This came to the US in 2010, and I've talked a lot on All Things Nintendo about how Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver are my favorite Pokemon games in terms of quality. I think that, Silver and Gold, Gen 2, is the best generation of Pokemon games. And it's, a really, it's just incredible going back and playing Heart Gold and Soul Silver that this game gives you not only the Johto region, but then the post game of those games is just beyond mind blowing. And seeing the passage of time in those areas that you go and visit is just unbelievable. And I resisted going to Gen 2 for the longest time after playing Gen 1 because I didn't want to learn a whole new set of Pokemon. I just wanted to stick with my original 151. But eventually I did bite the bullet, played the Gen 2 games, and I'm so happy I did because I think they're objectively the best games in the series. And Heart Gold and Soul Silver are incredible remakes that I wish they would bring to modern consoles. Coming in at number 21, Horizon Zero Dawn. This was kind of one of the unsung heroes of 2017 because 2017, a lot of people look at other games that came out that year. It's one of the greatest gaming years in history. And Horizon Zero Dawn was one of the early games of that year to really hook me in. Um, this came out at the end of February 2017, so we were right on the precipice of receiving the Switch, and I fell in love with the character of Aloy, with her world, with the open world exploration, the robot dinosaurs, the story of how humanity got to this perilous place, the world being so beautiful, but also tragic in its design and in its backstory. And yeah, I didn't Horizon Forbidden West didn't hook me the same way Horizon Zero Dawn did, but like the combat, the strategy that is involved in the combat, it all feels so good in Horizon Zero Dawn, and it easily knocks on the door to get into my top 20 almost. But yeah, I couldn't foresee having I couldn't have fathomed having a top 50 list without Horizon Zero Dawn on my list. Going down to number 20, I referenced it in the Street Fighter 6 section, but Street Fighter 2, in particular, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. This came to arcades in 1994, but I actually discovered it in 1995 going to my cousin's house because he had a copy of it on DOS. And I remember playing that, and I'd seen the arcade cabinet in my local arcade and thinking like, whoa, this is like new but familiar. Some characters had new moves. There were new characters you could play as. I had no idea who any of these four new characters were. And yeah, it's just, mechanically one of the best fighting games to ever exist. I know that there's a lot of Street Fighter 3 fans. For me, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo is the pinnacle of the Street Fighter franchise that pretty much every other game in the series is always going to be compared against for me anyway. I know there's a lot of I love Ultra Street Fighter 4 and Arcade Edition, and as I mentioned before, Street Fighter 6. But Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo is going to be almost impossible to beat in my eyes. Going down to number 19, 2011's Batman Arkham City. Arkham Asylum really showed me that that superhero games can be more than just cheap cash-ins, cash grabs, right? Like at that time, we were getting things like the Iron Man game and the Captain America game and the Thor game. And then Arkham Asylum came out. And I remember reading the Game Informer cover story when I was in college and being like, this game feels unrealistically good, to the point that I didn't think it was ever going to come out. Now, eventually it did come out. It was incredible. Arkham City, opening it up in so many ways, giving you so many more villains to fight, so many more missions and objectives to tackle. It feels so good going around the city as Batman. It's a true Batman simulator, the way that Arkham Asylum was as well, and eventually Arkham Knight. But I feel like Arkham City was really the sweet spot for the franchise, and it really set the course for both superhero games and um, not only superhero games but just action games in general. The combat style that was established in um, Batman Arkham Asylum was so important for a lot of games going forward, and Arkham City just fine tuned all of that and created just the ultimate Batman game. I don't know if we'll ever reach a point where there's a better Batman game than Arkham Asylum or Arkham City. I'm sorry, and all other superhero games are forever going to be measured against the Arkham trilogy for that reason. Number 18, The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. And this is my favorite 2D Zelda game of all time. I had to do a lot of soul searching for this because it's so hard to say anything is better than A Link to the Past. Because as I said when I was talking about A Link to the Past during this countdown, A Link to the Past is maybe the most perfectly designed Zelda game to ever exist. One of the most perfectly designed video games to ever exist. The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds gives you that long awaited sequel. It delivers so much of what you would want from a 2D top down Zelda game and modernizes it in so many ways and gives you the fun idea of like being able to tackle the dungeons in any order you want and renting the item that you need to access it and complete the dungeon. It tells a really fun story involving Low Rule and kind of this rival or adjacent kingdom to Hyrule. And then the boss battles, the dungeon design, yes, it can be a little derivative of A Link to the Past at times, but it's supposed to be. It's a sequel to A Link to the Past, and the gameplay feels so good. The visuals grew on me. I didn't like them at first, but they did grow on me, and eventually A Link Between Worlds is the only Zelda game that I've ever 100%ed because it is just so freaking good. And the multiplayer is, it's asynchronous multiplayer. It's fine. You can defeat other people's shadows for rewards, but the meat of this experience, the single player adventure, is one of the greatest top down action games to ever exist. Coming in at number 17 for me, I believe this is going to be the final sports arcade game that is going to be on this list, but it's a good one. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Now, Pro Skater 1 was, revolutionary. It's the reason I bought a PS1 was because I wanted to play Pro Skater 1. Pro Skater 2 just perfected the formula. Like, what else can I say? Pro Skater 2 gave us so much about the game that we loved from Pro Skater 1 and added a lot to it. The team at Neversoft obviously learned about the flow between the areas and the levels. They added, I believe this is the one that added manuals to the formula, and that allows you to chain together giant combos. It's just truly one of the most unabashedly fun and nonstop action games that I've ever played, and it set the blueprint for a lot of games that came after it, and all of them kind of fell short of the highs that Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 accomplished. There's a reason that it's one of the highest rated Metacritic games of all time. Number 16. I've already had one game from from Rockstar Games on this list, and this time it's going to be Red Dead Redemption, the first one, the original Red Dead Redemption. And this came out in 2010, which, man, did this make 2010 a very difficult year to determine Game of the Year. But Red Dead Redemption, it really raised the bar for what I came to expect from Rockstar Games. The Grand Theft Auto titles were always so much fun. GTA 3, Vice City, San Andreas, and of course GTA 4. Red Dead Redemption was on a whole nother level for me. And, it established this whole Wild West world that, Rockstar showed that they can do more than just modern day cities. They made it so that riding through a desert was enthralling. They made this story of vengeance, of redemption feels so impactful for John Marston. And it's a story that doesn't reach the highs of Red Dead Redemption 2, but in terms of the overall game, I think it's paced better. And the overall experience just really is going to stick with me for the rest of my life. Coming in at number 15, it is probably my pick for my favorite Mario game, my favorite 3D Mario game. That is Super Mario Odyssey. I talked about Mario 64's impact on me, and nothing could ever come close to that in terms of, what the Mario franchise can accomplish. But Super Mario Odyssey gave me so many of the feelings that I had from Super Mario 64. It delivered a sense of excitement, a sense of adventure. It iterated on kind of the format of Mario 64, but like, giving you the ability to not have to restart an area just because you got a moon the way you did when you got a star in Mario 64. So many of the captures, the abilities you could capture in Mario Odyssey are just unbelievable, just so much fun, so innovative. Like the creativity at play in Mario Odyssey is Nintendo at its best. This is why Nintendo is always going to be the greatest developer in the industry, because they have the creativity to put out a game like Mario Odyssey. And even though, earlier in my top 50 I sang the praises of Astrobot kind of shows that they're on par with Nintendo when they're at their best. Mario Odyssey shows that Nintendo is able to just put out game after game like this. Like, because you think about other 3D Mario games. There's Mario 3D World, which is also incredible. There's the Galaxy games, just unbelievable. The level of quality that Nintendo is able to accomplish with the Mario franchise is seemingly, impossible to match by anybody else. But Mario Odyssey, I think, is the most fun that I've had with a 3D Mario game since my first time playing Mario 64. I love Galaxy. I love 3D World. Mario Odyssey takes it for me in terms of the best 3D Mario games and my favorite 3D Mario game. And it earns number 15 on my top 50 games of all time. Number 14, I talked about the impact that Batman Arkham City had on me. This is like the natural evolution of that. And it is Marvel's Spider-Man from 2018. This was my game of the year back in 2018. It delivered so much of on my love of Spider-Man. Growing up, I was more of a Spider-Man and X-Men fan than I was Batman, even though I loved a lot of Batman stuff as well. And for a while there, I was much more of a DC guy than a Marvel, like once I was in like early adulthood. But Spider-Man has always held a special place in my heart. And Marvel's Spider-Man showed that Insomniac is the right developer for this job. They got the traversal down so good, like swinging from place to place, getting to your destination. I've made the joke in the past of like, there's a skip intro button on almost every show that you watch on streaming services now. You don't hit that skip intro button when you're playing or when you're watching the X-Men animated series. And the same joke applies for Marvel Spider-Man, where it's like, there's fast travel, but you don't use fast travel because it's so much fun to get from point A to point B in these Spider-Man games. Really, Insomniac Games knocked it out of the park, and the story is great. It's emotional. I'm pretty sure I teared up at one point in the story the first time I played it. Um, the Rogues Gallery is used to perfection. I love that they kicked off this seemingly trilogy of Peter Parker starring Spider-Man games with a Sinister Six story, with Doctor Octopus being kind of the ringleader there. Yeah, I love Spider-Man 2, and Kraven and Venom were amazing to fight. But Marvel Spider-Man that came out in 2018 just impacted me so much that it jumped up to become one of my favorite franchises in gaming. And I cannot wait to see the further evolution of this franchise and what else Insomniac can do with characters like Wolverine and whatever other characters they're able to get their hands on in future games. Number 13, maybe, I mean, this is up there with one of my most played games of all time. It's the original Overwatch. I know that the Overwatch franchise has a little bit of dirt on it right now. Um, but it's hard to replicate the feeling that was within the games industry. And being a longtime member of games media, the fact that Overwatch took over games media for the longest time because it was so darn good. It was such an incredible experience. There was I mean, you can never say it was a perfectly balanced hero shooter because they definitely had their fair share of imbalanced updates, and they had to roll back characters or rework characters pretty frequently to make them more balanced. But the experience itself was always so much fun. I played, anywhere from 2 to 4 hours nearly every night for 3 or 4 years following the launch of Overwatch 1. And I put in over 1,000 hours into this franchise. 1,000 of those hours were in Overwatch 1. And, it's just one of those games that I don't play it anymore, but I still think that it's, up there with my favorite games I've ever played because of how much of an impact it had on me and what a tectonic shift it was in the industry. Because this inspired, I know Team Fortress 2 came before it, and there were other hero shooters that came out before Overwatch, but Overwatch really kickstarted the hero shooter revolution that happened in the industry at the time. And it is among the most fun I've ever had playing video games in my life. Number 12, speaking of games that are among the most fun I've ever had in my life, Ghost of Tsushima. Man, what an experience. From the opening scene of getting your group attacked, your nation attacked, and then going on a quest for vengeance and retribution, and just from that opening moment to the title sequence where you're storming through the field of flowers to the very final scene in the story. Ghost of Tsushima is a relentlessly beautiful game. And I talked earlier in this list of Assassin's Creed Odyssey and how it was the right amount of bloat and the right amount of the right amount of content, and it was paced out evenly for me. Ghost of Tsushima is even better at that. It feels like the classic Assassin's Creed meets the modern sensibilities, meets the modern Assassin's Creed, and then also set in feudal Japan, which is a setting we had been waiting for the Assassin's Creed franchise to go to for a decade and a half or more. And I know they're finally doing that with Assassin's Creed Shadows, but Ghost of Tsushima may have, eaten Assassin's Creed Shadows lunch at this point. And the story is beautiful, the setting is beautiful, the combat is incredible, even though it took me a while to get used to. This is another game that if I didn't get 100%, I came darn close to it, and it's one of the most incredible experiences. I can't recommend it to enough people, and if you haven't played it, you absolutely should. And play it on a PS5 if you can, because the smooth frame rate is just it elevates the beauty of it so much. We're right at the edge of the top 10 games I have ever played. Number 11 came out in 2011. It is Portal 2. I know 2011 had a lot of great games. It had Skyrim, it had Arkham City, but Portal 2 was my personal game of the year in 2011. And, it was just a perfect step up from what the Portal 1 delivered. And I will acknowledge that Portal 1 is a more tightly designed, better created game. But Portal 2 really brought everything to the next level and turned this side game. A lot of people forget that Portal 1 was created as a side game to the Orange Box. And it was such a huge hit that they created a full-fledged sequel over at Valve for Portal 2 in 2011, and they added so many cool mechanics that the story is intricately designed. So many Easter eggs that point towards like a story that you would never know existed, even if you paid super close attention. Um, you have to do deep dives on YouTube if you want to get the true full story. But even if you don't do that, it is a lot of fun to just go through this world, exist in this world, and uh, you know, interact with the characters like GLaDOS and Wheatley. That it's just, and there's a co-op multiplayer mode that's a completely separate campaign that is just, it's a 10 out of 10 game for me, no matter how you shake it. It's just one of the greatest games that I've ever played, and one that if you haven't played it and you like a puzzle game, Portal 2 is my favorite puzzle game of all time. We are now into the top 10 of my favorite games of all time. This is probably the game that I have played the most in my life, at least the franchise that I've played the most in my life. I've talked a little bit in past content about how I used to play a little bit of competitive Guitar Hero. But my favorite entry in that genre was always Rock Band 2. Rock Band was my favorite franchise for the longest time, to the point that I was buying every single piece of DLC. And remember, they were putting out weekly DLC, not just like a couple songs here and there for $2 each, the way they were at the end, but they were putting out like $20 worth of DLC for a long time there. I have several thousand songs in Rock Band to this day. Rock Band 4, I'm so happy that existed on modern platforms that are going to be forward compatible going forward. So I don't have to worry about losing access to it the way that I have with like the Beatles Rock Band. But Rock Band 2 was kind of like the perfect, tightest version of this game. And I was so into this series that around this time, back in 2008, 2009, when I was playing it constantly, I considered selling all my other games because I was like, I'm not really using my Xbox 360 for anything other than Rock Band and Guitar Hero. So that's the level of obsession that I had with Rock Band 2 in particular. But Rock Band 3, Rock Band 4, the Beatles Rock Band, those are all worthy of being on this list as well. But for the sake of having an actual list of the top 50 games, not just the top 50 series, I wanted to single one out. And that Rock Band 2 for guitar, bass, drums, microphone, no matter what I was playing, I was always better or best at guitar. That's the one I usually defaulted to if I was just going to play by myself. But I loved doing all of the different instruments, and the library was just really ballooning at that time. And it felt like, this was one of the greatest games of all time for me at that point. And to this day, I look back at it as a top 10 favorite game of all time. Going down to number 9, came out in the US in 1998, Pokemon Red and Blue. I talked about how in previous entries in this list, how Heart Gold and Soul Silver and Gold and Silver are probably the best Pokemon games objectively. But Red and Blue were the ones that forever cemented themselves as my my favorite RPGs, among my favorite RPGs to ever exist. It was my first RPG I ever played. Pokemon Red and Blue was my love of this was inspired by the anime. Like, I had a friend at lunch tell me like, "Oh yeah, you got to check out the anime." So I did that, and then I was like, "Oh well, this is awesome." And it was on TV right after I got out of school. So I watched that, and then I got into the Pokemon cards, and then I begged my parents to give me a Game Boy Color with either Pokemon Red or Blue for Christmas. They obliged, and the rest is history. It's a game that I've replayed ad nauseum at this point. I pretty much know Red and Blue like the back of my hand, and it's one of the most memorable experiences I've had in gaming. And if they, no matter what they do to it, whether they remake it like similar to like Fire Red Leaf Green, where it's a little bit more faithful with some bonus content, or if they kind of modernize it in ways that I'm not the biggest fan of, like they did with Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, I will still play it, and I will still love every moment of it, even if I'll have my critiques like I did with Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Moving down to number 8, It's The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. This came out in 2023 on Switch, as you probably know. Follow up to the Breath of the Wild. That's a tough act to follow, and Tears of the Kingdom knocked it out of the park. Making it so that you're exploring the same Hyrule. That could be very boring, right? Like you could get onto the same Hyrule, and it could just be like, okay, I've been there, I've done that. But no, they still made the exploration extremely rewarding. They added the fusion mechanic. They added Ultra Hand, obviously, Ascend, all these ways that made it so that exploration was rewarded in incredible ways. They did new shrines. They created the depths. They created the Sky Islands to make it so that there are reasons to explore further. Um, Really, just a terrific follow up to an incredible game, Tears of the Kingdom. Not to mention, probably the best final boss battle in the Zelda franchise history, which is saying a lot because there are so many memorable fights at the end of Zelda games, and the confrontation with Ganondorf is one of the most memorable final bosses I've ever taken on in my life. Number seven, this is another one of those where it's like, I'm not going to just like say the franchise. I'm going to say the specific game, Mass Effect 2. Now, I'm not somebody who thinks that Mass Effect 3 is awful. I think Mass Effect 3 is an incredible game and probably, the best entry in the franchise. And I know that's a hot take. I'm not as bothered by the ending, especially now that the ending is after they patched it and made it like so much more robust. But Mass Effect 2 is kind of the pinnacle of the series. And it was the one that showed me that this franchise is something truly special. Going around recruiting your teammates, so much choice that you can have, to the point that like you can choose to do loyalty missions, and that affects their likelihood of surviving the final mission. You have to make sure you have the right people for the job for the suicide mission. You have to make sure that you are you know making all of the right calls, because all of this stuff is going to follow you into the third entry, which will come out 2 years down the road. And like there's so much that you have to keep in mind as you're playing the role of Commander Shepard and navigating these relationships and navigating these missions that you are asked to complete. It is, one of those once in a lifetime experiences doing that final mission for the first time, and truly something special in the history of gaming. And I know the Mass Effect franchise has lost some of its luster in the past decade or so, but Mass Effect 2 is one of those games that I will never look back at with anything but admiration and love. Going to number six, uh, we had a Sonic entry earlier, and now we have another Sonic entry. And this is Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Now, I debated whether I needed to split these out as Sonic 3 or Sonic and Knuckles because they were released as separate games. But in the time since those games released, it's almost been canonized by Sega that these are separate, or I'm sorry, one singular experience. And Sonic 3 and Knuckles is such a step up over Sonic 2, which I think for a long time was seen as the greatest Sonic game. And there's been kind of like this swing back in the other direction now that says that Sonic 3 and Knuckles is actually the best game in the franchise. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. Sonic 3 and Knuckles really delivers a connected experience that takes you through a story. Like the environment transitions all make it make sense, from going from one biome to the next, and then to the next, and then to the next. There's a through line that follows you through this story. The music is incredible. The level design, it's classic Sonic level design at its highest level. The graphics were incredible at the time. The sense of speed, everything that you want from a Sonic game. Not to mention that when you combine these two experiences, and you can, go all the way from Angel Island all the way up to Doomsday Zone and take on Robotnik in this epic final confrontation. It's all just one incredible experience that blends together perfectly. And, it's a game that I can replay infinitely and never get tired of it. I wish that there was a way that they could figure out the music rights for modern versions of Sonic 3, but for what it is, I will take it at no matter how it is, as long as it's a good port of this game, because it's a masterclass in how to design a classic Sonic game. We are now in the top 5 of my top 50 games of all time. This is a title that I never expected going in to have this in my top 5 games of all time. It is Persona 5 Royal. Now, I've talked about on All Things Nintendo how Persona 4 was a game that came highly recommended to me. And I eventually I bounced off it after I bought it. I played it for about 2 hours, and there was so much dialogue, so much no real indication of how I would like the gameplay aside from that opening battle that was so quick and simple that I was just like, okay, I don't know how much I'm even going to like this game. And I'm already having to invest so much time into Persona 4 Golden just to get to the fun stuff. And then Persona 5 came out, and I was like, okay, it comes highly recommended from all my fellow RPG lovers at Game Informer at the time. Let me give it a shot. I gave it a shot, and it hooked me so immediately, and I could not love this game more. Persona 5, at least I didn't think I could, because then Persona 5 Royal came out, and I reviewed this for Game Informer, which meant that I put in about 120 hours within the course of like 2 weeks. So I did not play this in the optimal way of playing a Persona game. But it's just the story is terrific. The setting of Tokyo is incredible, but the cast is what ultimately makes me fall in love with games from this team. Um, Hashino and Soejima and their team, whether they go by P Studio or Studio Zero, as they have with the Metaphor franchise or the release of Metaphor Refantasio, they have really done something special. But for me, Persona 5 Royal will likely always be my favorite entry from that studio. Um, just everything came together so perfectly. Maybe Persona 3 Reload or Persona 4 Golden are better overall games, but I think that the handcrafted dungeons of Persona 5 Royal and Persona 5 Vanilla uh, just set it a little bit above the other entries, even if some of the themes and narratives of 3 and 4 are a little bit better. Persona 5 Royal, just one of my favorite RPGs I've ever played. Now it's number 4. I've talked about Mario quite a bit, but this is the greatest Mario game, in my opinion, anyway. That is Super Mario World. It's my favorite platforming game of all time, as you've heard several times on All Things Nintendo. Uh, what can I say, really? I talked about how in past entries, Super Mario Brothers 3 is really platforming perfection. Super Mario World is also platforming perfection, but they add so much to the overall package. Like the power ups are better in Mario World. The addition of Yoshi just revolutionizes the 2D Mario experience. I think the level design in Mario World is better. Um, just so much about this game takes Mario 3's successes to the next level. I understand why somebody would like Mario 3 better, but Mario World, it's up there with Super Mario Kart as one that is very important to me in terms of my relationship with my father growing up. We played Mario World a lot as well, but yeah, Super Mario World is just it's the most perfect platforming game I've ever played. And it's one that I can always go back to if I don't know what to play on my Switch, or if I don't know what to play on literally any console that it exists on. I just fire up Mario World because I know that I'm going to have a great time. It's going to get me right into the fun. It's going to get me right into the action. And no matter how long I play, I'm going to love every moment. So Super Mario World comes in at number 4. Number 3, Final Fantasy X. I was never really an RPG guy growing up, but you know, Pokemon was my entryway into the RPG genre. And then Final Fantasy X was what solidified it as my like one of my favorite genres. After when I was talking about GoldenEye earlier on in this list, I talked about how that like kind of set the tone for games that I liked for the next several years. I've sought out all kinds of first person shooters, even if they were like known to be bad first person shooters. Final Fantasy X did that for me for RPGs. I kind of after playing Pokemon Red and Blue, I thought like, okay, well that's fun, but nothing's really like this. Then I went and played Final Fantasy X, and I was like, oh, there are other games like this that do really cool things with the mechanics. The turn-based system in Final Fantasy X is maybe my favorite turn-based system ever. Um, the story was compelling. I adore the cast of characters. I think that Yuna is one of the greatest characters in RPG history. Aaron is just a total like just incredibly awesome badass character. He looks incredibly cool. His design is awesome. I love his backstory. I know people at the time at least hated Titus, and I say Titus, I don't say Titus. I know that's technically incorrect, but I grew up saying Titus. People hated Titus at the time. I think he's an incredible character as well. I love playing as him as I go through Final Fantasy X, and it's the story is terrific. There are things that I don't like about it, like the cloister of trials. I'm not the biggest fan of those. There are like some parts of like Blitzball that I don't like, even though overall I do enjoy Blitzball. But like the celestial weapon missions are also things I don't like. But there is no game that I can just replay anytime, anywhere, on any system, and know that I'm going to enjoy it as much as Final Fantasy X. The way it all comes together, once the story really starts singing, I, yeah, it was in contention for my favorite game of all time for a very long time. And I don't see it ever being topped by any other entry in the Final Fantasy franchise for me. It's going to be hard for any RPG period to top Final Fantasy X for me. Now, my top two games, they go kind of hand in hand. So let's just do number two, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It was a game that really changed a lot in terms of what I knew video games were capable of. It Mario 64 was the game that all platformers chased from 1996 to like the mid 2000s. All other 3D platformers were trying to be Mario 64. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time really did that for every other action game, right? Like the Z targeting really made it so that games still use that a variation of the Z targeting to this day. And then the mission design, the level design, the dungeon design is all top tier. Some of the greatest video game songs of all time come from Ocarina of Time. For a while I was like debating, is it Final Fantasy X? Is it Ocarina of Time? It's my favorite game of all time. This was, back in 2015. I was thinking about this in my head. Then I played the 3DS remake again of Ocarina of Time, and it was like so clear in my head after finishing that like, oh yeah, this is 100% my favorite game of all time at that moment. And it's just an adventure unlike anything else when it came out, and it really has withstood the test of time. And I hope that future generations are able to enjoy it the way that I was, because I know that we have advanced far beyond what Ocarina of Time has accomplished, but it really made it so that I changed my perception of video games after playing Ocarina of Time. It felt like I was playing through a movie that no other game before that was able to give me that feeling. And then we've come to my number one game of all time. If you listen to All Things Nintendo, you already know what it is. It is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, this is a Switch launch title that came out in 2017, and it accomplishes something that I never thought possible. I talked about Ocarina of Time changing my perception of what games are capable of. It gave me such a sense of wonder. It gave me such like oh my gosh, like this world feels infinite in size. And now you look back at Ocarina of Time, and yeah, it feels less infinite and less mind blowing. And I thought that, like, okay, well, I've played a lot of other open world games, and I've talked a lot about them in my top 50 lists as I've rattled down, made my way through this list for you all. I've talked a lot about the open worlds that I really, really love, and I've played so many of those that I thought that I was never going to feel that sense of wonder ever again in a video game. And Breath of the Wild somehow captured that feeling that I had the first time I played Ocarina of Time, because just exploring Hyrule in Breath of the Wild feels so incredible. It feels unlike anything I'd ever experienced, really. Like the sense of, like, oh, I can go explore and like climb a wall, and like when I get to the top of it, I don't know what it's going to be, but it's probably going to be something incredible. Breath of the Wild just captured my imagination and instilled that feeling that I thought I was never going to feel again now that I was an adult, and now that I was, used to how giant open worlds exist in the games industry. And Breath of the Wild flipped that on its head and showed me that developers can still surprise me. Developers can still, even in a well-worn category like open world action games, developers could still catch me off guard and show me something I had never seen before, and raise my expectations and change what I come to expect from these games and from these well-worn mechanics. uh, yeah, Breath of the Wild just is an experience that I will never forget. And I said this about Ocarina of Time for the longest time, that it was going to be hard for anything to top that. But Breath of the Wild truly is going to be something that's difficult to top. But if something ever does top it, I cannot wait to play that, because it will be something truly special. So thank you so much for sticking around, listening to my rambles about why these games are so special to me. Um, this has been something that I've been wanting to do for a really long time. And, I understand if you disagree with any of my picks, that's fine. If you don't think a game that I love is as good as I say it is, that's fine. This is my personal list. This is, again, as I said, when I first started this list, this is not the objective best 50 games of all time. These are just my 50 favorite games of all time. And, if you have your own list that you want to share, please share it. Share it in the comments right on this post. And let me know your top 5, top 10, top 15 favorite games from your personal perspective of all time, because I would love to hear more from you. And thank you so much for listening. And be sure to follow the channel. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to, uh, you know, interact with the posts. And if you like what you've heard here, go listen to the All Things Nintendo podcast. It's a weekly Nintendo focused podcast that I do every single Friday. I also have a Patreon that allows you to get early and ad free episodes. But for now, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you on that show. All right, I hope you enjoyed that rundown of my top 50 games of all time. Again, like I said in the end of that video, please share your picks for your favorite games of all time. I am extremely interested in knowing what the people of this podcast are interested in, and that helps me shape the future of episodes that I do on this feed. I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, I think next week we'll be back to talking about new releases. There's a couple of big ones hitting next week, so we'll have a good show of all things Nintendo, an all new show of all things Nintendo, talking about probably Metroid Prime 4 and Marvel Cosmic Invasion next week. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and if not, then next week we'll be back to normal. But thank you so much for listening. As you know, the Patreon and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in. But you can also reach out to me at brian@allthingsnintendo.com, or hit me up on Instagram or Blue Sky at Brian P. Shea. That is our show for this week. Thank you again so much for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Before we wrap up this episode of All Things Nintendo, I just want to give a special shout out to the $10 patrons of this podcast. Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Chad Brecky, Chaps My Ass, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jawar Hello, Johnny Five, Jose Villalobos, Joshua DeProy, KC Radio Man, Cody Gibson, Creeper 207, Ozman83, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Robert Sosa, Roberto Nieves, Roger Reichert, Russell Sayer, Smithy Poo, Zane Sink, and Zek 3 Sword Sama. Thank you so much for your continued support of this podcast.